Please be seated. I am pleased now to introduce Mr. Christopher Kilner, who will speak on behalf of the class. Christopher.
Father Quinn, Bishop Ambera, Provost Harrington, members of the Board of Trustees, distinguished guests, friends, family, and especially the class of 2016. I am humbled to speak before you today. Personally, I would like to thank my family for all they have done these past 22 years. I'd especially like to thank my great uncle Richard for making the trip down here today, and my sister for sharing her birthday to listen once again to her brother speak. In choosing what to speak to you about today, I ran into quite a catch-22. I wanted to discuss serious and profound themes and ideas I have gotten out of my Scranton experience, but I'm worried most would tune out anything resembling a lecture at this point. I also considered delivering a funny speech, but my inadequacy in humor would probably lead you to also tune me out. So instead, I decided to speak on something we all can relate to: what I've learned from ice cream. In all seriousness, though, the story I have learned from Shirley, a woman who owns and works at a Dairy Queen by my home, surpasses anything I have learned in the classroom to date. And while our formal education is priceless and valuable beyond measure, education augmented by meaningful, genuine human interaction transcends all. Despite having a living family, Shirley was placed in the care of nuns at an orphanage in Taiwan in the early 1960s. A precocious child unafraid of the tumultuous world of her time, Shirley would, beginning at a young age, often ask the nuns charged with her care where all the money to support the orphanage and school came from, for she could see no business model or a source of income. The nuns would reply that it came from a Catholic church in America. Shirley would then ask, why? Sometimes the nuns' answers would be that their faith calls them to do so. Other times it would be an empty answer. But the answer Shirley most remembers is they want you to learn. They want you to become educated. Filled with gratitude to the Americans who sought to educate a young orphan girl on a distant island, Shirley sought to one day come to America. In the 1970s, Shirley emigrated to a place not too far away, Reading, Pennsylvania, with the sponsorship of another parish. There, she worked 6 days a week in her aunt's restaurant. On the 7th day, she would travel to the local library, where retired school teachers held English as a second language classes. Shirley remains grateful to this day to these men and women who dedicated their time to share in her dream of a better life. Shirley continued to work in the family restaurant through the 1980s, and with near fluency in English, began to earn a college degree. Keeping in mind the answer often given to her by the nuns, they want you to learn. She would become happily married. All seemed to be going well for Shirley, until the day she and her husband discovered that he had cancer. The fragility of the lives they built became apparent in the cost of the treatments, yes, but even more so in the potential loss of a companion. Knowing the difficulty of the situation and desiring to raise their son in a world of opportunity which they had not had, Shirley and her husband began working more and working harder throughout the 1990s. Toward the end of the decade, the couple heard about an opportunity to open a Dairy Queen franchise at Montgomery Mall in Bethesda, Maryland. And despite having never traveled to the state, decided to seize the chance for upward mobility, purchasing the franchise with the $50,000 they had saved over the previous decades. In 2002, the Dairy Queen at Montgomery Mall opened. Shirley, out of a desire to provide her son with a great education and the opportunity to pursue any dream, something our parents and guardians have done for many of us by sending us here to Scranton, works every day the mall is open, 363 days a year. This not including housework or general errands too. Those still happen on her 2 vacation days. She works so that she can continue to learn from her customers and coworkers. And she works out of gratitude towards those who provided her with an education and the opportunity to emigrate. I tell you this story not as a story of an immigrant fulfilling the American dream, which it is, or a story of motivation, which it most certainly is. I tell you this today because I believe the 21st century fundamentally will be defined by the tension between migration and walls. From individual challenges to global challenges such as racism, poverty, sexism, income inequality, oppression, and climate change. Migration, the movement of species, peoples, cultures, ideas, and policies, challenges and develops the world. We are, by our nature, migratory beings. Walls, the physical, cultural, intellectual, sociological, psychological, and spiritual barriers we establish, stifle and stymie the world. Confronting and answering the problems of the world requires not just the how questions, learned through basic education and innovation, but more importantly, the why questions, through examination of our common humanity. As we graduate today, we will be faced daily with both pre-existing walls and the option to construct walls. Why we as a class choose to build or break down walls will define us much more than how we construct or tear them down. Shirley fought many walls to reach today and overcame them with migration. The first greatest wall we have or will all face daily is our own inhibition. Shirley first asked the nuns how the orphanage and school were paid for. The answers she received were satisfactory, and they did not lend themselves to much self-reflection. Her why questions, though, carried with it an implicit recognition of questioning her own worth and place in the world. For why would people spend money on her? This why question exposes our own vulnerabilities and requires that we overcome our own walls of self-defense and self-protection. Many of us have experienced this on retreats at Chapman Lake or in talks with friends in the Rose Garden. Many of us have experienced this here at Scranton collectively with friends. We have followed these passions which arise from the why questions, like our classmate Pat, who began Ranchula Fitness, whose mission is to support those who seek to live healthy and holistic lives in a non-mainstream way, who are not afraid to challenge themselves by asking the why, because that is the only way to grow and inspire others. Overcoming this first barrier can be achieved by embracing the wonder of the world and through loving. Overcoming this first barrier requires a self-transcendence. Fortuna audaces juvat. Fortune favors the bold. The world needs less people who live to succeed and more people who succeed at living. The defining characteristics of our lives should be wanderlust and wonderlust. What seizes our curiosity, motivates our intellect, and moves our soul determines why we live. It allows us to transcend our own walls. There is more on this earth to be seen and tried than could ever be achieved in 1,000 lifetimes. But this thought should not deter us from living all the experiences we can in one. For it is in these experiences that we fall in love with ourselves, a person, an idea, a community, and a world, and create a story which allows us to ask the why questions. In the words of the Jesuit Pedro Rupe, fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. To fall in love, we must not only experience the world, but we must let it speak to us. It is in the silence of nature, of birth, of death, of love, and of life that our minds and bodies transcend the boundaries of our limitations as one to transform the world. As the Lakota Black Elk once said, there can never be peace between nations until there is first known that true peace which is within the souls of men. Once we overcome our first barrier by asking the fundamental why question, we can begin to confront communal systemic walls. Shirley was able to overcome walls of poverty, immigration, economic opportunity, language, and her husband's cancer because she had the support of a community. In the end, though, she was still the one who had to overcome the walls. Only those who are walled off can break down those last pieces, but only with the tools and support of those on the other side. We have all been given an education which allows us to identify walls, ask why they exist, and develop the tools and resources to break them down. Again, as with individual walls, the most fundamental component is asking the why question. This can be much more difficult on a global level because the problems of the world often immediately beg the how questions and answers at the expense of the why. Unfortunately, how questions can often lead to the construction of more and/or higher walls. Rather than asking why income inequality exists and paying a living wage, we outsource jobs. Rather than asking why climate change is a threat to all life, including our own, and creating a sustainable infrastructure and means of production, we continue to create greener fossil fuel sources, placing the burden of climate change on future generations. Rather than asking why people get sick and why people engage in unhealthy behavior, and why society and culture encourages these behaviors, and rather than practicing preventative medicine, we treat diseases reactively, with medications whose side effects are often worse than the initial problem, and which usually require even more medication. Even technology, with all of its great and helpful advancements in and contributions towards health and civilization, can build walls between people. Many of you may even be texting, tweeting, Snapchatting, and Instagramming at this very moment. While means of communication have gone up, we feel more separated than ever. While the world has become more global, we feel more foreign than ever. We often can no longer identify with our common humanity in different cultures. We objectify, scapegoat, and stereotype whole groups and cultures in pursuit of the how questions of the world. How to end poverty, how to end terrorism and violence, how to solve climate change. The answers to the world's problems will be found in our collective humanity, Shirley continues to astound me with her generosity. After ordering many medium mint Oreo blizzards from her, Shirley began talking with me whenever I frequented the store. She began to share her story, which, if I was consumed with my phone or the hectic pace of life, I would have missed. Comfortable overcoming my own walls, I began to share my story, which Shirley found out about my work with the nonprofit I founded, the Wape Foundation. She became its biggest monetary supporter and advocate. The foundation works with the Red Cloud Indian School on the Pine Ridge Reservation to promote healthy, holistic living and education through grassroots community development. Without the support of foundations like ours and private donors, the Red Cloud School could not educate these children, who often grow up in circumstances similar to those found in the Third World despite living in the United States. Shirley found in my story a collective humanity in 3 different experiences: that of the Lakota children, that of myself, and that of her own story. The poverty of these Native American children is her poverty. It is our poverty. She donates to Wape's STEM education program because it was those Americans many years ago who had spoken to her of the importance of education. Shirley's understanding of this importance, of the importance of the migration of ideas, cultures, and people to encourage and dialogue and promote education lends to her generosity. The why question unites us. Acknowledging our common humanity can be challenging, though, because it is simpler to ignore the existential questions, to never admit we may be wrong, and to avoid overcoming our own vulnerabilities and shortfalls. It is much simpler to wall out the problems of the world and solve whatever few remain within that new compound. Yet we lose dialogue and move further away from true solutions. For politicians, how to achieve an agenda and get elected becomes more important than why they are serving our country. Our politics is more polarized than ever because politicians and voters are unwilling to even speak to or dialogue with those on the other side of the aisle. If we can't even speak to one another, how can we ever work together to solve the problems of our nation and our world? In today's political season, we have heard a lot about building walls. For walls are a simple solution to complex challenges. But I hope through your Scranton education and what I've imparted onto you today, that you realize walls are never the true solution. Migration, dialogue, education, and reflection are, for it is in these that we find our collective humanity. We have a clear choice to make in the exercising of our democratic and civic duties. We can choose to build walls, or we can choose to tear them down. We live in a nation where we can exercise our vote and our voice for whomever we choose. We also live in a nation with ideals of equality and opportunity passed down and defended by the sacrifices of American children born of immigrants, by veterans. That this nation believes in the words inscribed in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that we have many more natural rights enshrined in the Constitution. Walls are a form of discrimination, and discrimination in any form is still discrimination. If we allow the pundits and politicians to divide us into red states and blue states, we will forget that we live in the United States. If we build walls to keep out our brothers and sisters of the Muslim, Jewish, and other faiths, we only deny our own freedom of religion. If we build walls which turn away refugees and immigrants, we forget the sacrifices and ideals of our own ancestors and those who truly make the American dream what it is and change the world. We forget the story of Shirley. If we build walls against our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, we fail to recognize the dignity of all human beings. If we build walls of injustice against the progress of females, we ignore the inherent equality of all life. If we build walls against our neighbors because of the color of their skin, we deny the sacrifices and dreams of our ancestors who marched arm in arm in the face of racism. If we build walls of security at the expense of liberty because hatred and fear blind us from the why, we succumb to the worst in humanity. If we build walls against rising sea levels so as to live in the comfort of the modern economy, we transgress the sanctity of life and our duty as caretakers of this earth. If we build walls of insult to drown out the voices of those with whom we disagree, we muzzle our own freedom of speech and the power of language for productive change. And if we build walls of ignorance and anti-intellectualism so as not to feel inferior, we forget the sacredness of education and its role in bringing down barriers of all kinds. For education is dialogue with oneself, one's friends, one's enemies, and one's world. Education is the most powerful form of migration. Education is justice. If we build walls, we neglect the inscription on the Statue of Liberty, the spirit of which has brought immigrants from my own great-great-great-grandparents and your family members to Shirley, to this land since its founding. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest house to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. So, class of 2016, my challenge to all of us is to remember the importance of seeking out our common humanity, never allowing the simplicity of walls to overshadow the difficult yet meaningful questions and answers of why. Never forget that we are on a journey and to live boldly and love fully, and to never forget where we come from, whether from humble roots in West Philly or simple beginnings in Denver, because we always come from a place of love, something we can attribute to all those who are here for and with us today, and all those who have supported us along our journey. To acknowledge that we are all connected in ways we do not realize. To remember that what we are passionate about, what major we have chosen, and who we surround ourselves with are all built on a communal sharing, a migration of ideas, friendship, and love. Always ask the why before the how. We will want to make an economic living, but this living should not define, build walls around, and box in what we make and what we are made of. We will want to earn promotions and honors, and the world will want to fence us in to a straight and narrow, ideal pathway to achievement. But we should always remember to be more humbled by how we progress spiritually and personally. We will strive to change the world for the better, but we should always remember to never change ourselves for the world. We shall be bold, we shall be royals. Go out and set the world on fire. Go write your story individually and communally, and together, let us build a just world, an educated world filled with migration, from the bricks of the walls we tear down. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That's quite a charge to your class. Outstanding, thanks. I now